First of all, I don't consider myself a master at drawing the human figure because every time I sit down to draw, I feel like I'm still learning every day. But I can show you what I've learned throughout my career and my experience over the years. Having said that, I want to recommend to you the two sources that I've learned from. The first is my teacher from college named Glenn Vilpu. He is an amazing artist and teacher, and I highly recommend learning from his classes, books, and DVDs in addition to what I'm going to teach you here. I love his methodology and approach, which I've patterned my own drawing style after. Every time that I see him drawing, I draw better myself, and that has to be a good thing. And so maybe that will help you too. Another source that I've learned a great deal from is the Walt Stanchfield notes. He's the one who trained the new generation of Disney artists for decades, and now his notes from those classes are available on a compilation of 2 books called Drawn to Life. Walt's notes really helps you to understand the creation process in drawing and the tried and true design techniques which help our drawings to communicate with more clarity and strength. Today for our figure drawing lesson, we're going to talk about the gesture. Learning to draw the gesture is the first step in figure drawing. It's all about quickly and accurately capturing the essence of a pose in just 15 to 30 seconds, or at the very most within a minute. Let me share a quote from Walt Stanchfield. "The most logical approach when faced with a model is to lay in the basic pose with some simple elemental shapes. Ignore the details of the costume. First, study the pose for the gesture." End of quote. Well, what does that mean? It means that you have to look at the model in a whole new way even before you start to draw. See the model already as a simple gesture. Train yourself to look past the details of the folds of the clothing and details in the hair and whatnot. Then he adds, quote, "You might have to add a little of your own thespianism," end quote. What does that word mean? Well, it means drama, or acting, or exaggeration. Do not just draw what you see. You have the power to change it, or plus it, or exaggerate it. Make it more powerful and clear. I'm not saying to change the whole pose entirely, but I am saying that you should exaggerate certain elements to make it more strong. Because if you draw exactly what you see, it will become less than what you see, and that's boring. But if you exaggerate it, you'll probably hit the mark. It's a weird phenomenon, but it is true. Getting back to Walt's quote, he continues to say, "Then look for weight distribution," end of quote. So first he says, number 1, look at the pose for the gesture and to add some of your own thespianism. And number 2, he says, look for weight distribution. This is super important because by identifying right away where most of the weight is distributed across the body, you'll pretty much solve most of the drawing problems even before you put pencil to paper. Those 2 things are great advice. Looking at the model straight on, you can see that everything is symmetrical and even. But even on a straight pose like this, there is fluidity to the human body that I want you to notice. Instead of drawing it with stiff flat lines as seen here, or in a stick figure approach, you should use more S-curves and natural looking lines that better represent something alive instead of something robotic. Here's a better example of how you might draw this gesture. Notice the curves and more rounded natural lines. Here is what it would look like from the back view. We can see these natural curves more clearly from the side. So many people try to draw the human figure by building the body parts one exactly on top of the other, like a stack of blocks. But we are simply not made that way, as you can see from this side view of the model. Look at how the neck holds the head more forward, and how if you go down through the body, you can see these beautiful natural S-curves more like this. And it's amazing to see how they balance each other out. So now let's take the model and have her shift her weight and go through the 3 steps to a good gesture. Number 1, I first draw the head and pull of the neck. Step number 2, I define what the body is doing, which usually has a pinch and a pull to it. Then step number 3, you get to the ground. And how do we get to the ground? Well, by choosing the leg that has most of the weight on it. Then the other limbs which complete the gesture are easy to throw in. Remember that even a single line can represent the limb properly. Keep it simple because you only have a short time to complete it. Let's try that again with some more poses. Let's discuss for a moment the materials that you'll need for figure drawing. I like to use these Conte sticks. They're basically compressed charcoal, and they're nice because you can cover a lot of ground, and that's the whole purpose. You use your arm to draw instead of your little, wrist. And you're able to draw soft lines or sharp lines by just turning it and using the edge. So it's a nice tool to be able to, especially to gesture draw, because like I said, you can cover a lot of area. And you'll need newsprint pad, and I like this large one, which is 24 inches by 18 inches. It's kind of a standard for a classroom and figure drawing, but that's what I recommend. And you also need a board, a drawing board that you can put your pad on, which will make it so it's stable and won't wobble around. Also, later when we do longer poses, you might want to get some charcoal pencils or China markers or something if you want to do little details in the face area and so forth. But you can always, use your sketchbook, but this is what I recommend for a more professional figure drawing experience. Let's go through the 3 steps one more time. Number 1, start with an oval for the head and then add the pull of the neck. Number 2, define what the body is doing, which usually has a pinch and a pull to it. This step defines the posture. Then 3, get to the ground, first with the leg which has most of the weight on it. After that, you are home free because it's easy then to put in the rest of the appendages. It's important to note that in this approach there are several different phases or stages in completing a nice drawing. Depending on how much time you have will determine how far you get in that process. The gesture, which you've learned about today, is the first phase and is completed within 15 seconds to a minute's time period. The second phase is when you start to define the forms on top of that gesture and how the forms fit together, and that would be between the 1 minute and 3 minute time period. And of that we'll discuss in the next drawing lesson. And then if you have over 3 minutes, you can start adding the light and shadows, which we'll also talk about in later lessons. But note this, that in each stage you should be able to have completed a nice looking drawing, whether it's just a simple gesture or something more refined. That's your goal, to always complete your drawing within those stages. Okay, so let's go back and do one more round of gesture drawing for your reference. Remember to recreate the pose for the audience. Don't just copy it from life. Observe life, then present it or interpret it for the viewer as your own creation. Use the principles of silhouette and exaggeration for clarity. Ask yourself, what gives that pose its identity? Then after you've got that clear in your mind, then you start to draw it. Weight distribution helps to identify a lot. Your figure drawing assignment for this lesson will be to take the extra footage on this DVD we've provided of the model and go through and draw each of the poses as a gesture in the time that is given for each pose. It's always better to have a live model, but this is the next best thing. If you choose to, you can register for the online mentoring service that we provide and send it in for our review and critique.